Welcome to NBA Today. He is the one and only Ohm Youngmisuk. I'm Malika Andrews, and we are 1 week away, Ohm, from players reporting to training camp to meet with reporters. We have talked about that as being the next real pressing deadline here for a Damian Lillard development. So we're almost there. So with that, let's check in with our Marc Spears for the very latest. Marc, what are you hearing on the Damian Lillard trade front?
Well, everybody's waiting about Miami Heat and South Beach, and it's just everything I'm hearing is really, really quiet there, right? And Blazers are continuing to talk to other teams where I've heard the likes of Chicago and Milwaukee and even Philadelphia. And even though Chicago thing's kind of waning a little bit, but the hottest name that I'm hearing right now is of interest is the Toronto Raptors, actually. Talked to two really high-ranking team executives today, and they said that Toronto's the front runner, and they wouldn't be surprised if he ended up in the 6. Right now, though, there is no trade imminent. There's nothing hot, but I do know that Toronto is our interested suitor. They've had several conversations with the Blazers, and Masai Ujiri, his history, he's not afraid of doing such deals. I mean, the expectation is that Dame wants to be in Miami, and could he go somewhere else? But if he does go to Toronto, I mean, Masai did this in 2018 with Kawhi Leonard.
Yes.
Getting him from the San Antonio Spurs, convincing him ultimately that this would be a good place for that season, and the Raptors won their lone championship, and Kawhi moved on to the Clippers. But with Dame, you got a guy that's got 3 years left on his deal. He's known to be a professional. I know he would show up. I know he would play. Would he like being in Toronto? I think you're going to have to get Drake to get in his ear a little bit, be an ambassador that he is. Toronto's a great city. Masai would surely be rolling the dice here if he could get this to happen.
Yep.
But right now, it's really, really quiet, and people are talking the most about Toronto sneaking in there.
This is very interesting, Marc, because while you're saying there is no trade imminent, we know we're a week away from training camp starting, and that is a real deadline for Damian Lillard and the Portland Trail Blazers here. Don't go too far. I do want to crunch the numbers on this Toronto Raptors discussion for Damian Lillard here as we say hello to our front office insider, Bobby Marks. Bobby, this is a little bit tricky because offering a package that the Blazers want, but also leaving the Raptors with pieces to contend is a real balancing act. So please explain, how would this work?
Well, when you look at Damian Lillard, who earns $45 million this season, Toronto has to come within 125% of that number. So you're looking roughly around $36, $37 million. And when you start building the contracts, it certainly starts with a player like OG Anunoby, and then we can go certainly with a player like Chris Boucher, Otto Porter Jr., and Grady Dick. That gets you there, Malika. And we haven't even talked about the draft asset component when you're looking at it, Toronto. Remember, they owe a 2024 protected top 6 pick to San Antonio, so there is restrictions as far as what they can trade, but I have a glass half empty feeling on this deal here because there is so much risk involved. You look at it from Portland's perspective, Anunoby's going into the last year of his contract. The cost to retain him is significant. And certainly from Toronto's perspective, how much better does Damian Lillard get you compared to where you are right now, compared to how much you have to give up?
Right, because when we're talking about the Kawhi Leonard trade, that's all in on a team that very much looked like a championship roster. I'm looking at this now, the trade machine that we just fired up, maybe it is, but certainly there's a lot more competition. This isn't necessarily an either or, right? It's not necessarily Miami or Toronto, but for the sake of discussion here, where is the better fit?
I still think the better fit for him is Miami.
Okay.
Just because seeing Miami get to the finals, seeing how they lost to Denver, how they needed one other guy to provide that scoring punch, the surefire points that they needed, Damian Lillard would be a good fit. Now, with potentially Giannis hanging out there in his future for next summer, what is Miami thinking now? You know what I mean? Because Miami's a team that, yes, could they use Damian Lillard? Absolutely. But they are also a culture that can get by and max out on the guys they have now. Obviously, they made the finals with this current group. So do they wait for Giannis? I find this very interesting, Malika. This morning, I got an email from Bet Online. Vegas tends to know these type of things. Remember, when Kawhi Leonard's future was up in the air, Toronto emerged out of nowhere in Vegas, right? This morning, I saw Damian Lillard next team if Portland or Miami is not involved. Boston Celtics 2-1. Boston Celtics. That would be a great fit for Boston. Obviously, they lost Marcus Smart. They would get a point guard in there who can score. Ooh, that'd be interesting.
Marc?
Well, I also hear that Portland Trail Blazers fancy Grady Dick, great shooter, young. And someone might say, well, what about Tyler Hero? He's a young shooter as well, but certainly the money is greatly different in both cases. And I believe Grady's a little bit taller as well. So keep an eye on that. He's somebody that they would definitely want. I don't think such a deal gets made unless Grady Dick is involved. But again, no trade is imminent. There's just been conversation. And that perhaps shows you where things are in the Lillard sweepstakes right now, is that there really isn't much going on, where Toronto looks like the hottest team just because everything else is so quiet.
Grady Dick, TikTok star, friend of the show. But the thing about this is, with training camp a week away, Mark, things can change just on a dime in terms of the trade market for Damian Lillard. So let's just back up the bus just a little bit, because you mentioned Boston. Bobby, can you make that work for us?
Well, remember, Jaylen Brown can't be traded because he signed that Supermax. We're certainly not involving Jason Tatum from a draft equity standpoint. They have all their first-round picks. San Antonio controls a future pick here. Now we're looking at adding those same numbers, getting to $37 million. Would it be a player like Derek White, who's penciled in to start this year, Malcolm Brogdon? I don't see how that fits in Portland, especially for a young team. Third youngest in the NBA. Robert Williams, as far as from a center position here. I see it hard from Boston's perspective, adding those numbers up there, just because there's not a blue chip prospect that would be involved in that deal.
Boston, certainly a team that's going to be judged in the playoffs, not in what they do in the regular season, if they can get over this hump. Bobby Marks, thank you so much for taking the time to break this all down, explain it to us as we see the numbers populating there on the screen. How would this deal actually work?
Well, as I said earlier, two GMs said that their prediction today is that Damian Lillard ends up with the Toronto Raptors. There really isn't anything imminent at this point, but there has been a lot of conversations, and the Raptors are seriously interested. So I do know that the expectation is probably that OG Anunoby would be included in such a deal. But I think the guy that the Blazers actually favor the most is the rookie Grady Dick. The thing that's also confusing is, will Damian Lillard be happy about going there? Obviously, all the talk is that he wants to go to Miami, but Masai Ujiri is not one that's shy of trying to take a chance. He did that Kawhi Leonard and won a championship, and I think he's not scared, and he has the power to do it in Toronto to try to get Dame there. You got Toronto as a pretty cool city, and you got Drake in his here. He's a fellow Raptor. I think they think that with the talent that they have, that Dame could end up liking it in Toronto. But they're a long ways from getting that completed. Just keep an eye on it. And I also hear that it's from those same GMs that they don't expect Dame to end up being in Portland on Media Day on Monday. They think he'll be gone.
You're saying that you're hearing that GMs do not expect in 7 days. We're not talking about Media Day sometime in the nebulous future. In 7 days, Damian Lillard is not necessarily expected to still be in Portland. So I look at you here, Tim, because we talked earlier, it's not necessarily an either or. It's not Toronto or Miami. It's not Portland or Boston. It's not necessarily that. But if you had to choose a fit for Damian Lillard as you look around the league, where do you see that?
I mean, Malika, the only place that's really made sense from both a return going to Portland and for where Dame could wind up from the beginning, to me, has always been Miami. Because if you're going to trade the kind of assets it's going to take to get Damian Lillard, you have to be good enough to be competing for a championship now. Because you're talking about trading for a guy who's entering his age 33 season, who's owed a couple $100 million over the next 4 years. That's not a trade you make if you're just trying to become a decent team. And let's say Toronto does end up trading for Dame, as Mark laid out before. They don't have a path to be a contending team with the Damian Lillard trade, with what they have. Because with the way their roster's set up, as Mark said, they'd have to trade OG Anunoby. They'd have to trade a guy like Gary Trent, potentially. They'd have to trade maybe Grady Dick, who they just drafted. They'd have to give up so much stuff off their roster that they'd maybe be fighting to be in the top 6 in the East with Dame on their team after trading picks and players off their roster. That just doesn't, to me, make a lot of sense from a fit standpoint for Toronto. Whereas if he goes to Miami, he's going to have the ball in his hands all the time. He's going to be the guy they go to score down the stretch of games. He fits in with Jimmy and Bam, and that team has a chance to contend. So we'll see if a deal gets done with Miami eventually, but I think part of the reason we're still waiting for a Dame trade to happen 2.5 months later now is because there hasn't been another team that's materialized that really makes sense to go all in and get him. Maybe Toronto does. I just don't think it materially changes their future, and they'd have to give up a ton of assets to go get a guy like Dame on their team.
What I'm real curious about is this: there's going to be a third team involved here, because that really could change a lot of the landscape, and that could be the first domino that falls before we see what happens with James Harden. And I think like a team like the Clippers is waiting to see how this all shakes out. So I'm really curious to see not only where does Dame go, but if a third team gets involved and all the pieces involved in that.
Ooh, you're looking into your crystal ball, and I like it. This is important because we are only 7 days away from Media Day. That means hearing from James Harden. That means hearing from Damian Lillard. And I know we are all curious what they have to say directly.